certain steps in order to reach a ceasefire between the two parties actually in Sudan, who are, as we all know, in front of us, are the Sudan's chief army, Abdel Fattah al-Burhan, and his former deputy, Mohammed Hamdan Daglo, the commander of the paramilitary rapid support forces known as RSF, since it erupted last April.
Yes, Ambassador Medhat, why is the instability in Sudan being out of the limelight lately?
Well, actually, we have to all understand, although that, as I mentioned, the war has erupted between the chief of army and his deputy, but actually this is a proxy war, as we all know, and we have to call things the way they should be called. There are countries who are actually allowing this war to continue, and not just that, they are actually escalating the war in order to benefit from the wealth of Sudan in another term. And this is actually the reason why this war has been going on for such a long time, and there are no humanitarian assistance that can be really implemented into the country because of this conflict that has been going on for such a long time, since April, as I mentioned. And I think that this proxy war have to stop, and the countries who are behind it and making wealth over Sudan's resources should be also held accountable for what's going on there.
So, sir, what international players, in your opinion, had the ability to convince the warring parties to sit to the negotiating table?
Well, actually, first of all, we have to mention the countries that are pushing this war to continue. That's on one stand, and this has to be very clear for everyone. But besides that, of course, the United Nations has to take a certain action, and maybe we can implement the United Nations blueberry, as they call them, the humanitarian and the military force that the United Nations disposed to break the war between the two conflicting parties. Especially, it's a civil war, and a lot of civilians are paying the price of this war. And I think that we don't need more than the 1,000 that have already met their death, and more even injured and displaced Sudanese to start deploying efforts from the United Nations towards Sudan.
So how would you list the repercussions of the Sudanese crisis on the region?
Well, as you know, Sudan is one of the richest countries in the region, and of course it's an Arab country, it's an African country, so all these circles are affected by the war. Of course, one of the most affected countries is Egypt, as you know, from the number of guests. I don't want to call them refugees, since Sudanese, we do not consider them as really a foreign country. But of course, this is putting large weight on the Egyptian economy, since we are talking about a substantial number of Sudanese, not to mention other Sudanese from South Sudan as well. So, I mean, this is actually one of the things that is troubling the Egyptian economy in this very delicate time, not to mention, of course, other nationalities that Egypt has been their host in the recent months and years. But I think that the most important thing is to start thinking about the importance of finding a solution for the Sudanese crisis and deploying all the good efforts in order to end this war that only the Sudanese people are paying the price and the penalty of having this war going on.
So, sir, how do you expect the situation to develop in the near future?
Well, as long as we do not really take measures, and they should be severe measures in order to stop the two parties and not to provide any armaments for the two parties, then this war will continue, unfortunately, to go on. Especially that there are, as I mentioned earlier, that there are countries who are benefiting from the raging war between the Sudanese people themselves. And don't forget that, of course, because of the lack of presence, clear presence of other countries involved in this war, I mean that there are any armed forces of another country. So the world is looking at this as a civil war, and then they should not interrupt with the Sudanese internal affairs. But actually we are going into a humanitarian crisis, and the world has to move just based on the humanitarian crisis that's been going on. And most importantly, and Egypt actually has been trying for a long time to mediate between the two sides in order to restore peace in Sudan, but so far it hasn't bear any fruits. And they hope that the international community would try to break between the two sides in order to restore peace in Sudan and for Sudanese to have their life as they should as any country in the region.
So, sir, one final question. Why have ceasefire deals failed so far to be implemented?
Simply, as I mentioned, because there are countries who are benefiting from this, and they are arming, especially the former deputy of the Minister of Defense. They are arming him, and they're giving him munition and enough to continue this war. And the Sudan, after the fall of the previous regime, seems like a good prey for anyone who wants to actually take the benefit of being the leader of this country and benefiting from all the wealth it has. So this actually have prevented the peace. I mean, imagine we have two forces, and I'm not going to talk just about the army, which is the legitimate force to defend the country, and of course the deputy of the minister, and both of them have arms, and they continue to wage war in order to obtain the absolute control over the country. Unfortunately, this is not happening, and the people of Sudan are paying the price, and they hope that before it's too late, the international community would break into between those two forces that are committing those crimes against the Sudanese people.
I'd like to thank you, Ambassador Medhat Meligy, former Assistant Foreign Minister. Thank you for being with us. And back to our reports from Africa. Senegal's parliament voted to hold a postponed presidential election on December 15th in the face of public outcry that led some opposition lawmakers to blockade proceedings until security forces intervened. More in this report.
Senegal's parliament on Monday voted to hold a postponed presidential election on December 15 in the face of public outcry that led some opposition lawmakers to blockade proceedings until security forces intervened. The move follows President Macky Sall's unprecedented announcement of a postponement on Saturday that pitched the West African nation into uncharted constitutional waters and threatens to further tarnish its reputation as a bastion of democratic stability in a region swept by coups. Riot police fired tear gas to disperse protests outside Parliament as lawmakers discussed the bill that initially proposed rescheduling the February 25 vote to August 25 and keeping Sall in power until his successor is installed. By the evening, just before the final vote, the bill was amended to propose the even later election date of December 15, but it was passed by 105 MPs in the 165-seat assembly. The last-minute amendment to postpone the election to December rather than August is likely to provoke further opposition backlash and risk a repeat of violent protests that have broken out over the past 3 years, partly over Sall's alleged authoritarian overreach. After hours of procedural discussions, lawmakers had been due to start the debate and vote on the bill when around a dozen opposition members rushed the central dais and refused to leave. They effectively halted parliamentary business. More than 2 hours later, security forces moved them off the central area, allowing the vote to proceed. The African Union and United States on Monday joined a chorus of calls from regional bodies and Western governments for a new election date to be set as soon as possible.
And South Africa's legends say Africa Cup of Nations semi-final with Nigeria will be tough. Bafana, the boys and the Super Eagles meet in the